Hello, my name is Mr. Chipman, and I teach biology and AP biology at Murray High School in Murray, Kentucky. And this is 1.10 energy flow and 10% rule in AP environmental. We're going to be reviewing some things we've already talked about, adding a few things to them. Let's talk trophic levels. These are feeding levels, right? These are the levels that you see in an ecosystem, starting at the producers at the bottom, which are producing some sort of like biomass, right, like glucose or something like that through photosynthesis, and then the consumers are eating that, and you have different levels of consumers till you get to the very top, and there's a single eagle who is the world champion of this particular ecosystem. Now, we talked a little bit about this last time when the idea about the energy transfer, and there's less energy as you get to the top. Well, it's actually like a very calculable thing. It's typically that only 10% of energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next trophic level, meaning the opposite of that is that each trophic level uses around 90% of the energy that it receives to do life, for waste, and then some of it is lost as heat, which we're going to talk about in a moment. This is called the rule of 10%, and you can see it here. There's 20,000 at the bottom. This is the energy that the plants get from the sun. The caterpillars and ants get 2,000 of that because the grass used 18,000 of that to do grass things. And some of it was lost as heat, right, which we're going to talk about in a minute. 2,000 that the mice and the caterpillars get, they're going to pass on to the whatever that mouse thing is, like a vole, probably. There's all sorts of weird names. Gopher vole, shrew, shroll, and the big arm frogs. They're going to get only 200 because 1,800 of that was used by caterpillars and ants in order to do those things. And the snakes then only get 20, right? And then the hawk at the top only gets 2. So there's very little energy once you get up to fourth level consumers, right? If it even gets to fourth level consumers. And now you can see why there's not this infinite stack, that you don't have this giant that lives at the top that eats everything, because there's just not as much energy. The giant would just have to sleep all the time in order to conserve his energy. So again, that energy is being used. You can see it on here. It's being used to do normal things, live, reproduce. Some of it is lost as waste, and a proportion of it is lost as heat as well. This is because of the concept of entropy. Entropy is in the second law of thermodynamics. This law basically says that in every energy transfer, there's a loss, right? And this loss is due to the concept of entropy. Entropy is essentially disorder, right? So think of the sun as very ordered energy, very good energy, very high quality energy. The plant is able to get a certain percentage of that. Is it able to get all of it? No. We have super plants, right? They're not able to get all of it. A lot of it's reflected back out into space. A lot of it is the plant just loses because of those energy transfers, but it gets a certain amount. The amount that it passes on to the grass, there's also an energy transfer there. And in that energy transfer, there's also a loss of energy, right? And then when the grass gets eaten by whatever eats, not grass, when the rabbit gets eaten by whatever eats rabbits, then there's also going to be a loss as well. And so all of those losses add up. In fact, every energy transfer in the whole universe is losing heat gradually, right? Well, losing energy as heat. Heat is very disorganized energy. And so eventually, the whole universe is just going to turn to just a big old ball of heat. We're going to be gone. So this brings us to the concept of ecological efficiency. So an ecosystem is efficient, right? How do we know it? Well, because it exists. If it didn't exist, it wouldn't be efficient. Now, of course, there's some inefficiencies here. We talked about entropy and that sort of thing, right? But there is a sort of inherent efficiency to this ecosystem, right? You don't have things eating killer whales because, well, it's just very inefficient to do so. And so the killer whale sort of exists at the top of his food chain. We're going to talk about food chains in 1.11. Now, what are some of the implications for this? Great question that I saw way back in my early days of teaching that I still use because I think it was so fantastic. Because you have two populations. You have one there. This is saying an Arctic population, a human population, and you have one population that is subsisting on whales, and you have another that are eating fish. Which one of those populations is more sustainable? It's the one that's eating fish. And the answer is because there's more energy in that fish level than there is in the whale level, right? You can just look and see. If you understand this rule of 10%, you understand that efficiency. So eating at the lower end of the food chain is much more efficient, right? As a whole, because there's just more energy available there. And protecting those lower levels of the food chain actually supports all the levels of the food chain. So it's really important. We're going to look at some of the implications of this when we get into food chains and food webs as well. But what's just an application for this in our everyday life? So here you have some cows, right? Cows are eating grass. And just think about which of them is more efficient to raise. It's much more efficient to raise crops, right? Like grass, things that use the sunlight, as opposed to raising a cow. Now, I'm not making a claim for one or the other or saying one is bad, one is good. What I'm saying is that you just look at human history. When we started growing food, instead of chasing food around and eating that food, our populations grew, right? We were able to sort of localize and begin growing civilization, right? Agriculture is the reason for civilization. There's no secret to that when you look at the biology behind it, because there's just more energy in those plants than there is in those cows. Let's have some practice. Energy pyramid shows 5,000 kilocalories available at the producer level. It's the very bottom, right? According to the 10% rule, approximately how much energy would be available to secondary consumers. So we understand the rule of 10%. We understand that primary consumers would only be getting 10% of that, which would be 500, and then secondary consumers would be getting 10% of that, which would be 50. Shouldn't be hard. 50 kilocalories. Hopefully that was a gimme. You were able to rest yourselves and prepare for 1.11, which is coming soon. Thanks for watching.